Everyone seems to be fighting right now. Owners, players, analysts, fans, everyone has an opinion about what the future of this league should look like. Contracts, revenue splits, television money, strike threats, negotiations. Every headline feels louder than the last. Turn on sports talk shows and they are debating numbers. Open social media and it feels like a battlefield of arguments about salaries, power, and who deserves credit for the moment women's basketball is experiencing right now. And somehow, in the middle of all that noise, my name keeps getting pulled into the conversation. Some people say the league depends on me. Others say I am the reason tensions are rising. Some people even argue that everything happening right now revolves around one player, one rookie who just wanted the chance to play professional basketball. But if I'm being honest with you, none of that is what I think about when I step onto the court. Because while everyone else seems to be fighting over who controls the future of the league, I'm thinking about something much simpler. I just want to play basketball. That's it. That's the part of the story people seem to forget before the debates, before the headlines, before the business side of sports started dominating every conversation. This was always about the game, the sound of the ball hitting the hardwood, the rhythm of a fast break, the moment when the crowd rises to its feet after a deep three. That's the part that made me fall in love with basketball long before any of this controversy existed. But the truth is, the league is standing at a strange moment right now. On one side, the WNBA is experiencing more attention than it has ever seen before. Arenas are packed, television ratings are climbing, sponsors are finally paying attention. For the first time in a long time, the entire basketball world is watching what happens here. And on the other side, behind the scenes, there is tension everywhere. Negotiations are intense. Players are talking about strikes, owners are drawing lines they refuse to cross, and the conversation has slowly shifted away from basketball and towards something far more complicated. Power, money, control of the future. When I hear those conversations, I understand why they exist. Every athlete wants the sport they love to grow. Every player wants respect for the work they've put in. But I also think something important gets lost when the noise gets too loud. Because at the center of all of this, there is still a game being played. There are still teammates working every day to get better. There are still fans buying tickets because they love watching great basketball. And if we lose sight of that, then the entire reason this league exists starts to fade. I didn't enter the WNBA thinking about negotiations or media narratives. I didn't come here trying to become the center of a debate about salaries or television contracts. I came here because I love this sport more than anything. I came here because when I was a kid, watching games from the stands, I dreamed about the moment I would step onto this stage myself. So when people ask me what I think about all the fighting happening around the league right now, my answer is always simple. Let everyone else argue about the business. Let the analysts debate numbers on television. Let social media keep fighting over who deserves credit for this moment. Because when the lights turn on and the ball is tipped, there is only one thing that matters to me: playing the game the way I've always played it. And maybe that's why this entire situation feels so strange. Because while everyone else is fighting over the future of women's basketball, I'm still focused on the same thing I was focused on the first time I picked up a ball. The next possession, the next shot, the next game. But to understand why the entire league suddenly feels like it's standing in the middle of a storm right now, you have to go back to what the WNBA looked like before all of this attention arrived. And the truth is, it looked very different from what you see today. To really understand why everything feels so intense right now, you have to understand what the league looked like not that long ago. Because the truth is, the WNBA has been fighting for attention for a very long time. Long before my name ever appeared in a headline, long before arenas started selling out, and long before television networks began talking about ratings again. When I was younger watching the league, the talent was always incredible. That part never changed. Players were competing at the highest level, championships were being won, dynasties were forming, and some of the greatest athletes in basketball history were building careers that deserved far more recognition than they were getting. But the reality around the league was very different from what you see today. Many games were played in front of crowds that were far smaller than anyone wanted. National media coverage was limited. Sponsors weren't exactly lining up at the door to invest millions. Even though the players were putting their hearts into every season, the league was constantly fighting for the kind of attention that other professional sports seemed to receive automatically. It wasn't because the basketball wasn't great. Anyone who actually watched the games could see the level of skill immediately. It was because momentum is hard to build when the spotlight isn't always shining on you. For years, the WNBA was slowly growing, step by step, trying to reach a point where the sport could break into mainstream conversation. And a lot of players before me carried that responsibility on their shoulders. They traveled city to city promoting the league. They played through seasons where the audience was smaller than they deserved. They kept believing that one day women's basketball would finally reach a moment where the entire sports world would start paying attention. That belief is the reason the league still exists today. Without those years of patience and commitment from players who came before me, none of the opportunities my generation has right now would even be possible. But even with all that work being done behind the scenes, the momentum always felt like it was moving slowly. Progress was happening, but it was gradual, one step forward at a time. Then suddenly something changed, and the shift didn't happen quietly. It happened fast. Fans who had never watched a WNBA game before started paying attention. Social media began exploding with highlights from women's basketball. Arenas that once struggled to fill seats started seeing crowds grow larger and louder. Television networks began realizing that people actually wanted to watch these games. And the strange part is, when momentum finally arrived, it didn't feel like something that had been carefully planned. It felt like a wave. One moment the league was still fighting for attention, and the next moment the entire basketball world was talking about women's basketball again. Suddenly every game felt bigger, every broadcast felt louder, every storyline carried more weight than before. And with that attention came expectations that nobody had experienced at this level before. Because when a league starts growing quickly, everyone begins asking the same question. Who is responsible for this moment? Who is driving the attention? Who deserves the credit for the spotlight finally turning toward the sport? Those questions can bring excitement, but they can also bring tension. Because when momentum arrives in professional sports, everyone wants to be part of the story. And that's when the atmosphere around the league started to change in ways that nobody could have predicted. When my rookie season began, I knew the attention around women's basketball was already growing, but I don't think anyone truly understood how quickly things were about to explode. Every arena we traveled to suddenly felt different. Cities that had hosted WNBA games for years were now seeing crowds unlike anything they'd experienced before. Ticket prices were rising. Fans were lining up outside arenas hours before games even started. And when we stepped onto the floor for warm-ups, you could feel the energy in the building in a way that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just Indiana anymore. Road games started selling out too. Teams that had never experienced that kind of demand were suddenly moving games into larger arenas because the normal venues couldn't hold the number of fans trying to get inside. Television broadcasts began drawing numbers the league had never seen. Before, highlights from games started trending across the internet within minutes. People who had never talked about the WNBA before were suddenly debating players, discussing matchups, and following a season like it had become must-watch basketball. And the strange thing about being in the middle of that moment was realizing that it wasn't just about one team or one city. The attention was spreading across the entire league. When one arena sold out, the excitement carried over to the next one. When one game produced a viral highlight, it pushed the conversation even further. Suddenly, the WNBA wasn't just a league fighting for visibility anymore. It had become one of the most talked about stories in sports. And that kind of momentum changes everything. Sponsors started paying closer attention. Networks began realizing the value of broadcasting these games. Merchandise sales jumped dramatically. Jerseys started appearing everywhere, from college campuses to professional arenas across the country. For the first time in a long time, the league wasn't just surviving. It was growing at a speed that nobody expected. But rapid growth can create complicated situations too, because when something becomes successful quickly, the question of who deserves recognition becomes louder than ever. Some people began pointing to the players who had spent years building the foundation of the league. Others started focusing on the new generation, bringing fresh attention to the game. Fans were arguing online about what exactly was driving the surge in popularity, and slowly the conversation started drifting away from basketball itself. Instead of focusing on the games, people began debating narratives. They began comparing players, questioning motives, and trying to explain the momentum in ways that fit their own perspectives. That's when the atmosphere around the league started to feel different. Not on the court, because the basketball was still incredible, but around the game. The spotlight that had finally arrived was now shining so brightly that every disagreement felt bigger than it actually was. And as the season continued, that tension began building into something even more serious, something that would eventually pull the entire league into a conversation far bigger than basketball itself. As the season went on and the attention around the league kept growing, something else started growing with it, and you could feel it, even if nobody said it out loud at first. The spotlight that had finally arrived for women's basketball was bright, but bright lights don't just illuminate success, they also reveal every tension hiding beneath the surface. Every game suddenly felt more intense, not just because of the competition, but because everyone knew the entire sports world was watching now. Physical defense became a topic of debate. Hard fouls turned into viral clips. Commentators began analyzing every moment like it was part of a bigger story. Some fans believed the league was simply becoming more competitive, that when the stakes rise, the intensity naturally rises with it. Others believed something else was happening, that the sudden attention had created a level of pressure nobody in the league had experienced before. When momentum changes the direction of a sport this quickly, emotions get complicated. Players who spent years building the league wanted recognition for the work they had done long before the cameras arrived. Younger players were stepping into the spotlight during a moment when the audience had finally grown. Fans on social media began choosing sides, turning normal basketball rivalries into full-blown debates about respect, legacy, and who truly deserved credit for the league's surge in popularity. Every interview seemed to produce another headline. Every game felt like it carried an extra layer of meaning, but when you're actually on the court, the game itself still feels the same. The ball still moves the same way, the scoreboard still decides the outcome, the challenge is still about competing at the highest level and helping your team win. Yet outside the arena, the conversations kept getting louder. Media outlets began framing everything as part of a larger narrative. Was the league changing too quickly? Were veterans being overlooked? Were younger players receiving too much attention too fast? Suddenly, the discussion around women's basketball wasn't just about talent or competition. It had become about identity, about how the league should grow, about who gets to shape its future. And then another layer of tension appeared when negotiations between players and league leadership started becoming public. Fans who had never cared about labor agreements before were suddenly reading articles about salary caps, revenue sharing, and the economics of professional basketball. Some players began speaking openly about financial realities. Others warned that major changes were necessary for the league to reach its full potential. The conversation had officially moved beyond basketball itself. It had become a battle over the direction of the sport, and that's when the atmosphere started feeling like a storm building on the horizon. Because when business, pride, and public attention collide at the same moment, things rarely stay calm for long. The louder the debates became, the more it felt like the league was heading toward a moment where everyone would have to choose what mattered most. The arguments about money and power were becoming impossible to ignore. And the strangest part of all was realizing that the thing everyone was fighting over was the same thing I had always loved in its simplest form: a basketball game. By the time the negotiations started dominating headlines, it felt like the entire conversation around the league had shifted into something completely different from the game itself. Suddenly, every discussion was about numbers, percentages, contracts, revenue splits, television deals, and what the next collective bargaining agreement would look like. Players were talking openly about salaries and the financial reality of playing professional basketball. Owners were emphasizing sustainability and the long-term stability of the league. Analysts on television began treating the situation like one of the biggest labor battles in sports. And the truth is, both sides had reasons for their arguments. Players want the sport they dedicate their lives to be respected financially. They want the growth of the league to translate into real opportunities and security for their careers. Owners, on the other hand, are looking at the economics of the league, the investments required to keep it running, and the risk of making promises that could threaten the stability of the entire system. From the outside, it started looking less like a negotiation and more like a collision between two different visions of the future. Some players began hinting that if the next agreement didn't meet expectations, drastic actions could happen. Words like strike and lockout began appearing in headlines. Fans who had only recently started following the league were suddenly trying to understand complex financial discussions that most people had never thought about before. And that's when the situation started feeling surreal to me, because while everyone was arguing about what might happen in the future, the present moment was still happening on the court, teams were still practicing, games were still being played, Fans were still filling arenas because they loved watching great basketball. Yet the conversation surrounding those games was now dominated by speculation about whether future seasons would even happen. The same way I heard people say that the entire league was standing on the edge of something historic. Some believe the negotiations could lead to a breakthrough that would transform women's basketball forever. Others warned that if the disagreement became too intense, it could slow down the momentum the league had just started building. But when I thought about all of it, my perspective kept coming back to the same place. Basketball has always been about showing up and playing. That's what fans fall in love with. That's what inspires the next generation of players. That's what keeps the sport alive. The business side of sports is important, but if the game itself disappears from the conversation, then the entire reason the league exists begins to fade. And that's why the tension around the negotiations felt so strange to me, because while everyone else was talking about what might stop the league, I was thinking about what keeps it going. The players who show up every night ready to compete, the fans who fill arenas because they believe in the sport, the young kids watching at home who dream about one day stepping onto the same court. Those are the reasons the WNBA is growing right now. And if there's one thing I know for certain, it's that all of those people deserve a future where the game continues moving forward, not a future where it becomes trapped in endless arguments about who controls it. When I look at everything happening right now, all the debates, all the headlines, all the arguments about money, contracts, and the future of the league, I keep coming back to the same thought that has been with me since the first time I picked up a basketball. This game is bigger than any one moment of controversy. It's bigger than negotiations. It's bigger than media narratives or online debates about who deserves credit for the attention the league is receiving. Basketball has always been about something much simpler and much more powerful than that. It's about competition, passion, and the connection between players and the people who love watching the game. I think about the young kids who sit in the stands now, the same way I once did, watching every play and imagining what it would feel like to step onto that court someday. I think about the players who came before me, the ones who fought for decades to build a league that could even exist in the first place. And I think about the fans who have started following the WNBA for the first time in their lives because they finally realize how incredible this level of basketball really is. All of those people are the real reason the league is growing right now. They are the reason arenas are full, the reason television ratings are rising, and the reason the entire sports world is suddenly paying attention. And that's why the future of this league matters so much. Because what we are building right now isn't just about one season or one generation of players. It's about proving that women's basketball belongs on the big no. There will always be disagreements about how to get there. That's part of sports and it's part of life. But the one thing that can get lost in all this is the game itself. The moment the ball is tipped, everything else fades away, the arguments stop mattering, the noise disappears, and what remains is the reason we all fell in love with basketball in the first place. That's why when people ask me what I think about all the fighting happening around the league right now, my answer is still the same simple truth. Everyone else can argue about the business side of this sport. Everyone else can debate contracts and negotiations and who deserves credit for the moment we're living in. But when the lights turn on and the arena fills with fans waiting for the game to start, I'm going to do exactly what I've always done. I'm going to step onto that court and play basketball. Because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that has ever mattered to me. And if this league is going to keep growing, if it's going to become everything we all believe it can be, then that's exactly where the focus needs to stay on the game. Stage in sports, that it deserves the same excitement, the same passion, and the same belief that fans bring to every other major league.